Hello there, my name's Steve, and you are tuned in to the Go Football podcast. So this is the podcast where I talk about grassroots football. Whether you are a player, parent, referee, just got to love the game, sit high, you are in the right place. So on the episode this week, we're getting very close to 50. This is episode 49. I'll be talking about, are there actually any experienced youth players? So we'll be dissecting all of that. So let's cue the whistle. Let's get into it. So big thank you back, as always. Coming back into the Go Football podcast. We're on episode 49 now, so one more and we hit that big number 50. Really excited. Thank you everyone for, like I say, one, coming back and listening, and two, for all the shares as well. Getting more listeners that are tuning in every week. So let's go through what I'm going to be talking about today. So I'll be talking about, are there actually any experienced players that are in youth grassroots football? The reason why I'll do this is that I see lots of times that there are people asking on lots of different forums, WhatsApp groups, Facebook groups, all the rest of it, and they only want experienced players. So let's have a quick look and see if there should be any experienced players. I suppose what we'll do today is, we'll talk about what experience is. I'll also talk a little bit about some numbers and figures that I've got, because you all know that I love this good stats, don't you? I'll definitely be diving into a couple of those. One, when I worked out, I was like, oh, that's I'm actually quite surprised with some of those too. So, stick around and I'll go through what some of those are. But, for example, can an 11-year-old really be experienced? Can we really be putting that kind of label on an 11-year-old child? Or someone who plays under 11s, maybe only 10 years old or 12-year-old, somewhere around those kind of ages. Or what are we doing really? Are we really expecting sort of like an adult understanding from children? We have to remember that children are children. They're not little adults. And if you think about everything else, kids at that age, they don't go to work. They have no concept of those kind of things. It's very, very different of how they perceive everything to what we do. Sometimes we need them to be 6 and 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds, rather than trying to fill them with all of the information we've got of watching 11-a-side football, especially if we've been parents before and we've been through the system and we've come out the other side of playing 11-a-side, maybe at a good level for a lot of players, and expecting them to know all of those things. Are we really asking them to do things that are maybe, unrealistic expectations? What can that really do to some young players as well? Well, look, I think unrealistic expectations definitely can damage development for some players, and I think there's also, I think it can damage it for a number of reasons, really. We're asking them to do things. I tell you, actually, I might have given this story away before. When my daughter was playing football, and she was probably, she might have been 7 years old, something like that. I remember one time I shouted on, I think it was her first or second game. She had some sessions with a coach. I wasn't coaching her, she was with someone else. And I just shouted across, get in the box. And she just turned to me and went, what's the box? Obviously I'm asking about 7 years, I think she was 7. 7-year-old to go and do something and they had no clue what it was. Was that good or bad of me? Obviously it was pretty bad for me, really. I should have known a lot better. There's lots of things that we can do, and that may have not helped their development. Maybe they weren't working on that. Maybe they haven't had that as a bit of a plan. Maybe that wasn't part of the team talk that they had either. So let's just have a quick look then. So what does experience really mean for players? I think for a lot of players, it generally falls under one of three things that we say when we say, is there an experienced player? Or when people are asking for experienced player, it means, have they been playing for a long time is probably one of them. Have they been playing at a high level is probably another. And have they played a lot of matches? Probably that's the third one, really. I think that's what most people are asking when they're saying, are they experienced, or we only want experienced players? They're asking for players that they don't want to maybe do a lot of development with, or the level that they're playing at probably requires people that also have been doing those things too. But serve time in the actual game and also as prep in football probably doesn't mean as much as what you maybe think. So let's say that we've got, and I've done some maths for this one too, so I'm happy for someone to go back and check my maths afterwards. Let's say that we have an 11-year-old. It sounds like I'm picking on 11-year-olds today, maybe because I've just been and done a under 11s game, so didn't win, by the way. 6-2 losers on that one. But with this, let's say that we've got an 11-year-old. Let's say they've been playing since they've been 5 years old. So, we've got a player that's been playing for about 7 six years, so something like that. Yeah, about 6 years. Let's just say that they were 5 when they started. They're now 11 years old. So 6 years worth of playing. Sounds like a lot, right? Sounds like a lot. So if we were working and we'd been doing a job for 6 years, we'd be pretty much pros. We'd be putting on our LinkedIn profiles as adults, wouldn't we? We'd be saying that we're experts in business development or whatever it is that we're doing. But let me just break some of these figures down for you as to the amount of time that really a player's had. So in that 6 years, I think that at the 52 weeks a year, I think that most players are probably going to play somewhere around 16. I mean, look at the weather we've had. Like loads and loads of training has been cancelled. We've also got Christmas, we've got Easter, we've got Spring Bank in there. We've got general illnesses. We've probably got a few days where parents can't take them and grandparents can't take them on those days too. I think that some kids will be missing about 16 weeks. I know it's going to be a bit different for some, but summer holidays and all the rest of it. Some clubs will shut down for 2 weeks. Then we've got 2 weeks at Christmas, probably a week at Easter. I mean, there's 5 already before we start going through the weather that we've been having. And honestly, 40 days and 40 nights, I think we've had at the moment, isn't it? That's what we've had at the moment. So, 6 years they've been going. Now, if we work that out, works out to about 216 hours worth of training hours, if you like. About 216 hours. Now, if we were to equate that into something that, as adults, that we can equate that to really quickly, and we were to put that into working weeks, it's about 5.4 weeks a year. Over 6 years that they've been having as well. So, look, if we were to say, go back as well, we would say that we were experts at something because we did it for 5.4 weeks in 6 years. So we'd probably say you're probably not an expert. So, do we have the right level of experience there? Well, look, there's something else also comes into this as well, doesn't it? Look, let's have a look at some of the games that we've got going on. A lot of the time, games run, again, look what we've also had, 52 weeks a year. Do we play 52 weeks a year? We don't play that. I think that we probably play, for most players, maybe play about 30 games a year, somewhere around there. I think that a lot of leagues have maybe sort of 10 to 12, plus their cup games, there's some friendlies in there too. I reckon that comes to about 180 hours worth of playing, because just think that the games and matches are shorter. They've got, lots of other things that are also happening there. I think that works out to about 4.5 weeks over 6 years again. Put it together. Listen, we're under 10 weeks in 6 years of football practice that these kids are having. So do we have any experienced players at that level? I don't think we've necessarily got some that aren't experienced. We've probably got some players that are better, that maybe do more. Maybe they have things like one-to-one sessions, small group sessions. Some clubs will probably train twice. So I'm saying, look, the figures that I gave there were just some rough estimates for a lot of players that maybe train once a week and play once-ish a week, weather dependent, I suppose, and also just how the schedule kind of works for them all. So what should we be happening in this as well? What should we have, for these players? Should they have things like tactical understanding at 11 years old? Bear in mind, 10 weeks of working weeks in 6 years, should they be having that? There's a lot of other changes that are also going on with players too. Brains developing, bodies are changing as well. They're getting emotional like growth spurts and, all the changes. And I talked about that previously too. I think that when we say experience as adults, we look at experience as in an adult's football, if you like. If I was asking for experienced players of an adult nature as well, tactical and awareness as well, I'd be looking for people that've got like emotional control, game management and decision consistency. I'd be asking for all of those things from players. Yeah, kids are not really going to give you that. So if we're going to games as adults, whether we're coaches or parents or just other on-watchers as well, probably going to see something very different. So when we talk about experience, I think we need a bit of context with that as to what we would be looking at from the experience side of it, on the amount of time that they've probably spent on a pitch, on a field, doing everything. Now, something else to consider. They ain't moving around for that full hour. They're going to have some game time in there. They might be still doing laps. They might be doing lines. They might be doing some of the practices. Everything else is going to be happening in that. So don't even see it as like a full weeks with them. So just be nice with some of these younger players. When you're asking for experience, just put a bit of context behind what it is that you're really looking for. So what should players youth players, maybe under 11s, what should they be able to do? And let's be realistic with a lot of this, because I think that sometimes some unrealistic expectations are put onto young players. And I think it does depend on the age groups and the amount of time that they've been playing. But I think there's a few things that people should be able to do as well. Look, for me, anywhere between 6 and 9, what should they be able to do? And they should be able to do this every age, really, I suppose, really. I think that they should be able to enjoy the game. I think they should be able to compete like fairly, because everyone wants to compete. You know, their level of competitiveness might be a little bit different. Obviously, follow basic instructions as well. Show some effort, so maybe turning up and listening and trying to do the right things as well, and improving technically. I think that they can always look at doing those things, and I don't think they're unrealistic. But I think that a couple of things that age group maybe shouldn't be able to do as well. Should they be able to understand like complex defensive systems? Should they have game management and be strategic at every kick of the ball? Probably not too. Stay in positions perfectly, honestly, like that. Look, we've all seen an under 5 games, right? We know what happens on those. The ball goes one place and, all of a sudden we've got 8 players and 2 goalkeepers. Goalkeeper at either end and we've got 8 players all together. So sometimes that can't always happen too. So sometimes we have to think like that. But can they control their emotions like adults? Well, no, not always. If I've seen, a lot of youth players of these age groups take a shot, almost hit the corner flag, and be in tears. You won't really see that in a men's game. You definitely won't see it in the women's game, because you're more control of your emotions with those kind of things. But I think like when we start looking at maybe a little bit older than that, so maybe the age group that I was kind of talking, so like 10, 13, maybe 11 to 13, somewhere around there. What should they be doing? And you'll probably get some players that be able to do this a little bit earlier too, and maybe some will be a little bit later, and that's fine. But understanding things like basic team shapes, because that's where we start thinking about 9-a-side. That's where we start thinking about 11-a-side too. We start thinking about these kind of other positions, and maybe they're used to it because they're playing FIFA, watching football on TV, watching older brothers and sisters that are playing games too. They might start being able to do other things like scanning more too, making, or definitely showing improvements of like decision making in the game, whether it's a pass, dribble, shoot, whatever it is that they want to do, taking responsibility in moments. So if they know that they're supposed to be close to a player, or maybe it's something different, maybe from a corner or something like that, defending a corner well, just staying with their player. They should start doing that really from these ages, and maybe start communicating a little bit better with teammates too, especially if they've been with the team that they're with for a little bit longer. Maybe they're starting to find their voice a little bit more. Maybe they're doing things like every time they've got the ball, they're passing it with instructions as opposed to just going long, just kicking it every time. Which again, look, is fine at the younger age groups some of the time where they just do that. But when we get a bit older, we want to change a little bit. But what should this age group not be able to do? Up the 11 to 13 or 10 to 13, somewhere around that. Well, one is they're not going to be tactically flawless. They're not going to be. They're going to make mistakes, and we need to sometimes make them do that. They're not always going to make the right decision. Sometimes, the amount of times that we're standing at the side of the pitch thinking, shoot, 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 and they pick a pass or dribble or something. Yeah, they're not always going to make the right decision at the right time. Maybe they don't have their heads up to see the right pass where it needs to go. So we shouldn't really act like they're going to make that decision all the time. And the other thing that they're not going to be able to manage as well is they're not going to manage the tempo like adults. They've got smaller legs. They're, playing on fairly big pitches for the sizes that they are. Although sometimes it's hard when you go onto a pitch as an adult, you think, oh God, this is tiny. But I always think back to when I was at primary school, where this is where we had to go in and vote. And it's not a political thing as well, but we had to go back and vote at my primary school's, it's not really a sports hall, just the assembly hall, I suppose it was. And I remember it being absolutely massive when I was younger. And I remember going back for the first time to go and vote. So bear in mind, I'd probably left at 10 and then I'd gone back at 18. I walked into that room and I was like, oh my gosh, this is tiny. How did we ever used to do anything in this room? Same for these pictures, I suppose, for a lot of the kids. So they're not going to be able to do all of those things. But, also puberty, that comes in as well. Maturation comes in for all of these kids as well. Physical changes, their hormones, they're going to get confidence swings. Confidence is very different. Sometimes they might have the confidence lows of the other side of it, really. But at this level, we should not be expecting consistent adult level decision making, because it's just not realistic for these age groups. I think if we start moving on to like 14 to 16, somewhere in that kind of bracket, yeah, we can start expecting that there's more experienced players doing that with like, better positional understanding to know where they are, whether they're playing not just in midfield now, they're playing as CDMs, maybe they've got a role within that team as well. Maybe they're playing like a 6 and their position is just to sit in front of the defence, to switch the ball and play it out. Maybe they'll start doing that. Tactical awareness of when we're saying things like underlaps, overlaps, maybe from left and right backs and wing backs. Maybe we're seeing more tactical decisions made around corners, set pieces, things like that too. And again, even stronger communication. Maybe we're going to expect that from the 14 to 16-year-olds, because I've got 2 within this age range at home. Honestly, one thing that they are not short of is talking and communicating. That's one thing they're not short of. And I think that sometimes we can also get this with 14 to 16s. They're probably able to maybe control their emotions a little bit more. They know that there's more eyes on them and things like that. But even still, they are teenagers. Mistakes are going to happen. Their confidence will fluctuate. It'll go up and down depending on how long they were on the computer the night before, what they've done, what they've eaten, how much homework they've got, if they've got exams coming up. It's all going to change for them. And sometimes it'll dip, sometimes it won't. But what we can't say is that experience at this stage is probably about exposure to situations and not mastery of any of them. Maybe just looking at what they've been exposed to within the game. And that's their experience. And that is, are they an experienced player or not at that age? So a couple of things then that we probably should not be expecting youth players to be able to do, and I think this is where it can go wrong sometimes for in grassroots football. Sometimes we expect some management of these players is slightly wrong for me. I think that they're not going to go into a game and they're not going to act like a professional. They're not going to know everything that happens. As to, the amount of times that I see players that are offside, flag will go up and they'll not be able to deal with it very well as to, like professionals should be able to. They're not going to be able to manage the game like professionals. So should we as adults be expecting them to do that? I don't think so. I think that that's a wrong thing to do. Can probably stifle their confidence, I suppose, in a lot of ways when we tell them to act one way, and really they shouldn't be acting that way. There's no other situation really that we should be asking anyone, any child. We don't ask them to do anything they shouldn't be able to do. We don't expect 7, 8, 9-year-olds to go and start doing their GCSEs. We don't expect 13 or 14-year-olds to be at university doing degrees. So why would we be expecting them to do the things on a football pitch on the amount of weeks that I just mentioned earlier? Remember, look, I know that some players are going to be different to that, but about 10 working weeks in 6 years is not a lot for these players to be able to get all the experience that we're expecting, maybe as adults and as parents, on watch as coaches. But a couple of the things that they're probably going to do at some point too is that, yeah, they'll lose concentration. Yes, they will do that. Yes, they can't control their teammates, so controlling their emotions and those kind of things. Also, and their experience of working in a team will be different, because it's great if they know that a pass should have been made. That's really good for them and they're experiencing that. But it's also sometimes the players that are around them, and some of the players that are around them may be on a different journey. And you look, that's fine. Not everyone can be on the same journey in the same team at the same time, doing the same things. And if it was, it'd be pretty boring, wouldn't it? Sometimes I like a player that is just really, really quick, and some players that are really strong, and some players that will just get really stuck in. You want a goalkeeper that's like fearless and maybe a bit crazy. You want all of these different things in your team. A couple of other things that I don't think that they should also be able to handle as well, and probably haven't got experience in, is that most players are not going to have, what's the best way of putting this as well? They're not going to be able to handle the pressure from the sidelines quite the same as maybe an adult would be able to, because in no other place in their life are they probably put under the same amount of strain and same amount of pressure that they are at a football game. If they go to school, teachers aren't shouting at them to do things, and also that it's not like we're all, as parents, stood outside the classroom knocking on the door saying, come on, get your maths done. Whereas at a game, a little bit different to that too. So sometimes, they're not expected really to have that experience of dealing with pressure from the sidelines. That can massively affect players' not just their experience as well, but how good they're going to be on the actual day. I think that's a couple of things that you'd also see is probably a big one really as well, is that they should have known better. I think with some players, experience comes with consistency, like the consistency of going training and playing games, the consistency of the things that they're taught, and also their personal development plan that they're on. I appreciate not everyone's going to have a full plan that's wrote out, but you're going to say to a lot of your players, your children, as coaches, this is what we're trying to achieve today. This is what we're trying to do. This is what we're doing in these sessions. What we're doing in these sessions. Parents will have the chats in the cars and at home and all the rest of it. How do we develop and how do we get better? How do we get more experience of those things? But the big one is really they're not always going to know better. And sometimes you hear it from the sidelines, I suppose, don't you, as well? It'd be like, oh, he's been playing for years. He should have known better. He should have done, but he's only had 10 working weeks worth of experience in 6 years. He's 11 years old, or she's 11 years old. They've not had that much. They've had 5.5 weeks in 6 years worth of training sessions with a coach explaining things for them to do. They're not going to know everything. So when we're looking at experience, do we have any experienced players really? I'm not saying that we do or don't. I'm just saying that, look, we need to look at it from a balanced point of view, really. If they're not having the time to be able to do all these things, then they're going to be less experienced. When we're looking for experienced players, the one that always catches me out, and I always get a bit, not wound up with it, but I always think some people asking for experienced players at like 7 years old, 6 years old, 8 years old. I just think they're not going to have any of these things. And bear in mind, that was those figures that I put out were over a 6-year period. So how many years of playing football could a 7-year-old maybe have had? Maybe a year, maybe 16 sessions, maybe 35 sessions or something like that. Yeah, maybe 35 1-hour sessions where half the session is sitting around. So we'll half that. So about 17 hours is all they're probably going to have. They're not going to be experienced. And I don't think we should really be asking for them to be experienced at that age. Like I say, look, if someone's shouting should have known better, maybe they should have known better. Maybe they would have known better if they'd have been able to practice more and had more time and they were a little bit older. Maybe that's right. I mean, look, football is a decision-making game, and youth football is all about development. So should we be expecting all players to just turn up and know exactly what to do and have perfect technique and all the rest of it? Probably not. Look, their brains are still developing too. If you look at things like 12-year-olds, they make poor decisions around general things. If you were to give them a computer and say, go to bed, here's a PlayStation, here's an Xbox, whatever, make your own decision about when you go to bed, a 12-year-old is probably going to make a bad decision about what time they go to bed, because they'll go to bed late, especially if they've got things like school the next day, and then they'll be like, oh, I didn't really do it. Sometimes they need to experience doing things themselves and understand that, and that's all about the development too. So is there a danger in labelling kids as experienced? Yeah, there probably is. I would say that there probably is going to be, really. When we say that, they're experienced, we're probably raising expectations for that player. If you're saying, yeah, he's an experienced winger, and then they go to a team, oh, he's an experienced winger, and then they go on and realise, maybe we make it a bit harder for that player. Maybe all of a sudden they'll start feeling like they can't make mistakes and mistakes are unacceptable. As opposed to trying things. I think the pressure might increase for some of those as well. And also, fear of failure can really grow on some players. And that's a negative. It might do things like reducing their creativity. When we say things like to some players, keep hold of the ball or make your own decision when you go forwards. If no one's in front of your ball, I'll always say to a lot of players, it's like progress forward until you're into a time when you need to make a decision. If we can carry the ball a long time, loads of time on the ball, and also they can choose when they're going to make that decision as well. I think that with a lot of youth players, even the ones that we're saying are still experienced or have got experience of the game, they're still going to need things like the guidance. They're still going to need feedback. They're still going to need repetition. They're still going to need support and a bit of love too, because we have to remember that they are kids. And, I think that if we say that someone's experienced, then sometimes we remove that development focus that we've got on players because we're like, no, they're experienced. They know what they're doing. They know what they're doing. So Is there a better way to think about experience, or how we should really be looking at experience? Look, maybe we should change the terminology. Maybe this would help some players as well. When instead of saying things like, "Are they experienced?" maybe we should be asking things like, "What have they been exposed to? What have you been exposed to? Have you been exposed to having to dribble up the pitch? Have you been exposed to situations which are 1v1s? Have you been experiencing when if you're playing as a centre back, have you been exposed to 1v1 development defending and been put under maximum amount of pressure?" I think that's probably a little bit better of a way of explaining how has someone had experience, because someone can say, yeah, they've got experience and been playing for 6 years. But if they've never had a 1v1 situation, or they've never been put in those 1v1 situations, that's going to be hard work, isn't it? Is that really experience? Probably not for me. Probably not. Maybe we should be asking, have they experienced pressure? Maybe we can do that in some of our training games. Maybe we can make it so that we're playing with massive under and overloads to add extra pressure to players. Is that the kind of experience that we're really looking for? And what are you actually looking for in an experienced player? Are we looking for an experienced winger? Are we just looking for someone to just get the ball and just cross the ball in? Are we looking for that? Is that all we're looking for? Or do they need the experience that they're going to have to make loads of recovery runs and get back and help out and support? Are they a really experienced player at playing it as a number 10, because that's where they normally play, they normally play as a cam or something like that, and then all of a sudden we change to a 4-3-3 and there's no position for them? How do we manage that experience of that player? Sometimes it can be a little bit tricky. I mean, I suppose really for grassroots football, our job's isn't to demand like adult consistency. Like shouldn't really be asking that for some players. It's a bit of a guide to how they can grow as players, I suppose, isn't it? Really, is what we're really looking for. What should it really look for? What should we really be looking for when we say inexperienced players? I think there's a few things that we should maybe put into their toolbox, of core skills, the things that we should be looking for, and have that plan of them gaining their experience at the right level all the way through, and not perfection, because no players are going to be perfect. In fact, I've got Soccer Saturday on in the background just over there now, and I'm seeing the scores come in, and I'm just thinking there's no way that all of these players are playing really well, because there's some high going scores in there at the moment too. So, look, are there any experienced players at youth level? Despite everything I've just said there, yes, there are. There are going to be some players that are playing a heck of a lot of football, and I see that. I have some players that come to me that are probably training 5 to 6 times a week, and they're training at very good levels. I know one player who's at 3 Cat 1 academies in their system at the moment, just deciding where he wants to go. He comes for one-to-one sessions, he plays grassroots football too, all of those different levels. So that is, I think that he's an experienced player. I'm probably going to get taken on by one of the academies too. In fact, really strong indications that he's going to go there. But children are still learning. They're still growing. They're still developing. Yes, there are going to be some experienced players, but just be a little bit more mindful of what you mean if you are asking, is this an experienced player? What we should really be asking is questions along those lines of, what have they been exposed to? What have they got experience in? And that will give us a better understanding as to how experienced that player is. So that's going to be the end of this podcast. Look, I hope I do hope that you find a lot of these podcasts informative, or make you maybe ask some questions, or maybe even do what I do when I listen to other people's podcasts. I sometimes have the idea in my head, like not like I'm crazy, by the way, but like just asking the questions back to someone, goes, oh yeah, such and such, maybe like what this one as well. Is there such things as experienced players? And I'll be thinking in my head, yes, no. Straight away, I'll be thinking of those things. So I hope that it gives you something to think about these episodes and these podcasts as well. As always, look, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you want to contact me, then do get in touch at gofootballpod@gmail.com. Again, you can find me on all the socials. So you can find us on Facebook, you can find us on YouTube, you can find us on all of the other normal channels. If you're watching the the YouTube version. If you wanted to listen to the audio only, you can flick over to Spotify, Amazon Music, Casterbox, and give us a listen and give us a bit of follow on there. So look, until next time, episode 50, the big 5-0. Look, I hope that you get your games on this weekend, and I'll see you all next week.